Hello everyone. Welcome to the Oregon Area Progressives Community Open Mic Night. Thanks for coming today. My name is Amanda Renner. That's my maiden name. I don't know where that came from. Amanda Peterson. Amanda Renner Peterson. There you go.
Call Jeff on you.
I'm losing my mind tonight, I swear. And I'm the MC. Thanks for your patience. And tonight we have a special guest, which we'll get to in just a minute. I do have a couple of quick announcements. We are having a canvas tomorrow here at the page. Oh, yeah. Carlene's prepared. She wrote this up ahead of time. It is a 60 Days to Victory canvas, and we're going to meet here at the Firefly. There's at 12 noon and at 2:30. Carlene has sign-up sheets. She's standing there with her arm up. We need all the help we can get. This is a pre-primary canvas. We're going to be talking to voters that are sporadic spring voters to try to get them out to vote. The election is February 18th. And it's really a biggie because it's for Wisconsin State Supreme Court. It is imperative that we get some changes on that court. I think you all know why. I won't go into it. But we're going to be out talking to people about that. We're going to do some issues canvassing about gerrymandering and voter registration. That we've had a lot of new people move to Oregon. And we need to make sure that they're registered as early as possible so they can vote in all 4 elections this year. 4. So, okay. That was the first announcement. Second announcement, there's some things in the back of the room that that are for sale. We've got some fare maps for Wisconsin water bottles for $5 a piece. Carlene is holding one up. And then we've got some straws, which are just $1 a piece. They're kind of neat, because it says on the side of the straw, gerrymandering sucks. And when you suck a blue liquid through it, they turn blue, or a cold liquid. A cold liquid, it changes color. So they're fun, they're reusable, good way to show your support for fare maps for Wisconsin. Oh, and the stickers are free. And yard signs. There's yard signs back there too. So please peruse those and check it out. Okay, now I'm really happy to introduce a friend of mine who I've known for several years now. I don't even know how long it's been. Our kids went trick-or-treating ages ago, and I don't know, but she contacted me after we did the open mic on racism with Harry Hawkins. And she's got a specialty, a PhD in theater arts. I might let you just do you have so many things after your name, I'm not even sure. But it's going to be a very interesting discussion talking about Mockingbird, the Children's Theater of Madison. And you yeah. Okay, all right. I'm just going to let her take it from here. But big round of applause for Megwin Sanders Andrews.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I'm Megwin Sanders Andrews, and I'm here to talk about CTM's production of Mockingbird, as well as disability representation. My PhD is in interdisciplinary theater studies with an emphasis in disability studies.
What's CTM?
Children's Theater of Madison. Thank you. So one of the things that I've thought a lot about is my own positioning in this field. Again, I've worked at the intersection of the arts and disability for 20 years, but I do not identify as having a disability. So there's some knowledge and lived experience there that I do not have. And I just want to acknowledge that and really welcome that into the space. If someone here has knowledge or lived experience, I wholeheartedly welcome your knowledge and perspectives and contributions. So Mockingbird opens February 22nd and runs through March 1st at the Playhouse Theater at the Overture Center. The play centers on a character named Caitlin, who is a young artist with a disability. She's a young artist on the autism spectrum, who has always relied on her older brother, Devin, to help her make sense of the world. But when she loses Devin in a tragic school shooting, she has to navigate the world without his guidance. I do want to mention that the play begins after the school shooting, so there's no gun violence on stage, but we do follow Caitlin as she sort of navigates her grief along with the entire community, which could be anywhere in the United States. The community comes together and embraces each other, they heal. It's a timely story about the power of resiliency that's based on the novel by Catherine Erskine. So, 20% of people in the United States have a disability. That's 1 in 5. A disability is any condition that provides a major limitation to one or more life activity. There are 2 models when we think about disability. There's a medical model and a social model. So the medical model really sort of says there's something wrong that we need to fix or cure. The social model is much more concerned with the interaction between the person and the environment. So it's less that there's something that needs to be fixed, but it's more about embracing a full spectrum of human diversity and focuses on how we can arrange and adapt environments to promote full inclusion. So rather than, I'm going to scare quote, fix the person, we make accommodations in the environment. I was asked to talk just a little bit about disability etiquette. So a lot of this has to do with person first. So I use, for example, people first language. So when I speak about disability, I use people first language versus identity first language. So person first language is just that. You put the person first. So I would say person with a disability, person with a cognitive disability, person who utilizes a wheelchair. There are some people who prefer identity first language. For example, in the deaf community, there's a tremendous amount of pride, right, in the deaf community. So it's often said a deaf person or as I just said, the deaf community. In the autism community as well, there's often that there'll be autistic person or, but I personally generally just do people first language until someone corrects me. So some general sort of disability etiquette items. Always talk to the person with the disability if you're talking to a person with a disability. Not the interpreter, not the caregiver, always the person with the disability. And I know that maybe seems a little bit obvious, but sometimes it's really not. Especially if someone is using an interpreter. To me, I will often sometimes feel a little bit rude because I'm completely ignoring this human being who's signing in order to talk to the person who is deaf. And so sometimes I feel a little bit rude doing that, but it is absolutely the correct etiquette. Give some extra time. If you're speaking to someone with a visible or invisible disability, we all process things at very different rates. I have a 6-year-old, and literally sometimes I will ask a question, and in my head, I will think, processing, and then he'll answer, right? Because that's the speed that he processes at. I process at a different speed, right? So again, lots of different speeds. Never hurts to just give a little extra time. I was a teacher for a long time, and so I would mentally count to 5 before I gave a second prompt. Same thing, I do that a lot. If I'm not getting an answer, I just count to 5. Ask before you touch. This one again, I actually made a mistake on this one today. There was a kid who fell during a class that I was teaching. And I immediately reached in and rubbed his back because it's what I would do for my own child. But kiddos on the spectrum or people who have experienced trauma, that can be a real trigger point, touching before asking. So showing that respect, showing that mindfulness of asking before touching. And then my final sort of general tip is I'm going to talk a little bit later about sometimes I feel like attitudinal barriers are really the biggest barrier right now for people with disabilities. And so this speaks to this a little bit. My final tip is to just relax. Often in my line of work, I feel like I'm being asked for some sort of magic formula. Like, there's a student with autism in my class. What do I do? And again, I sort of feel like there's some sort of, I'm being asked for a laundry list of things that you can do, and it doesn't exist. You just get to know the person and then find out what they need, just like you would for a person without a disability. So did you accidentally look at the interpreter instead of the deaf person? Oh no, the horror, right? It's not a big deal. Someone once, I was talking to a friend and she was feeling awful because she used the word run when she was talking to a person who utilizes a wheelchair. Again, that person's not gonna be offended, right? Like, it's not a big deal. It's much better to make a mistake because you're trying to reach out than it is to be so scared of making a mistake that you don't, right? If you don't understand someone with a disability, don't pretend like you do. That's what my husband does to me. He won't hear what I say and he'll pretend like he does. Don't do that. Just ask, right? I work with a lot of Edgewood students. And again, when we were sort of forming that partnership, I think there was a little bit of hesitation, not wanting to offend by asking what accommodations or supports can be useful. But no, they have a handout for you, right? If you ask that, oh, they have an answer. So again, just ask. So the two most important things, though, according to the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, focus on the person, just like person-centered language. Disability is one part of the entirety of, it's a personal characteristic that makes up part of who the whole person is. So person first. And don't make assumptions about what the person needs. If in doubt, again, ask. There's this really famous phrase in the autism community that's, you might know it, if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. You can do great planning for accessibility, especially with design and placing lots of great support options in place. But at the end of the day, we as humans are so diverse that the best thing you can do is work with each individual and that individual's needs. And that is my Disability Etiquette 101. That brings me back actually to Mockingbird, because that's really what we've embraced in the process with Mockingbird. So we've cast an actor with autism in Mockingbird, and we've really put in supports and accommodations, her name is Maddie, that are Maddie specific, right? They are what works for Maddie and what will help her. And we've had to adjust them, right? We've tried some things have worked, some things have worked less well, and we've adjusted and moved on. So as I said, 20% of the population at least has a disability. Only 2% of characters that we see on stage, on television, in the movies, only 2% of those characters have disabilities. So obviously underrepresented. Of those 2% of characters with disabilities, 95% of those characters are played by actors without disabilities. Then, on top of that, a lot of the narratives around characters and stories that have to do with disability are controlled by people without disabilities, created and controlled by people without disabilities. And some of those narratives can really forward some stigmatizing tropes about people with disabilities. Not necessarily intentionally, but because it's important to sort of understand disability representation within a history of disability representation. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. Did you guys watch Glee? No? Anybody? Oh yeah, I know, it was really big for a while, wasn't it? Like, yeah, I know. Well, I mean, I'm a theater nerd, so clearly I watched it because it had a Glee club in it, right? So Becky in Glee is actually a really great character, and it's played by an actor with a disability. So all that complaining I just did, no, this is a character with a disability played by a person with a disability. it's a multifaceted character and again, this was a really popular television show from 2009 to 2015. So again, many great things. There's two things that I want to address, though, about Becky in a specific episode called A Very Glee Christmas. So first is cuteness. So if you see the Facebook grab there, it's got a little line that says, "She's so cute," right? Way back, like literally 20 years ago, I was creating a theater production with a group of adults with developmental and cognitive disabilities. And we were talking about stigmatization around disability. And one of the actors said, we were really trying to draw out of them their responses to that. And one of the actors said, "I'm not a kid, so I don't like it when people treat me like a kid." And that's really what this gets to in a lot of ways. When I talk about it, I draw on a scholar named Lori Marsh. She argues that cuteness unsettles the conventional boundaries between child and adult. So in short, it infantilizes. The cute is culturally positioned as an object, not a subject. So if you're positioned as an object, not a subject, you don't have agency. The appreciation of the cute entails a structure of identification wherein you want the cute to be just like yourself. So by conflating the cute with an adult with Down syndrome, this promotes a culturally sanctioned maternal or paternal attitude for persons with intellectual disabilities by persons without. So sort of a preservative love and protective cherishing. In this case, in this sort of protective cherishing, the person with the disability becomes owned and cared for, again, like a child. Ultimately, the aesthetics of cuteness, so cuteness in this example, always to some extent aestheticizes powerlessness. I'm going to give you another example that's pretty far away from Becky the Rain Dog. This is an exhibit called What Is It? Did anybody see that movie about P.T. Barnum?
Yes.
So it sort of came into some popularity in the cultural consciousness a few years ago. P.T. Barnum was a genius at sort of being just ahead of what was about to become popular. He created this exhibit titled What Is It? Slightly prior to eugenics' ascendance in the United States. The exhibit endured as eugenics rose in prominence and established itself as a movement. Also known as ZIP, William Henry Johnson, the man in the photo, was a man with microcephaly. This exhibit, which was toured and was shown across the country, characterized Johnson as half man, half animal, who may be the missing link.
That would be P.T. Barnum.
Right? So I just want to draw your attention again to that sort of, it's a really common trope, right? To dehumanize by conflating with an animal, which is also what happens to Becky here in A Very Glee Christmas. You can see that she's Max, the rain dog, to Sue Sylvester's Grinch. So again, so many great things about this character, but sort of a lack of awareness of how it's functioning in a history of disability representation that includes exhibiting people with disabilities as half animal, half human, and missing link. So another one that you may or may not know is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. It's a novel and a play. My critique of Curious is entirely based on the Broadway production. It was amazing. They climbed on the walls. it was pretty spectacular and it was totally problematic. I'm not going to go into the whole plot, but one of the main themes of the play is that Christopher, who's the main character, he has autism. He goes on a journey in the play. And in that journey, he sort of overcomes the restraints of his disability, which dovetails with this sort of transcendent narrative that's really popular around narratives of disabilities in the United States. There are countless stories of people who overcome their disability to achieve great things, as if disability is something that can be transcended or discarded. Curious creates and fosters a really specific and socially acceptable brand of autism that undercuts the diversity of real people on the autism spectrum. Further, Curious is a performance of autism itself through the lights and sound and sets and special effects. They, in essence, invite the audience to experience their representation of what it's like to be autistic. This performance of autism is complicated because although the production had an autism consultant, neither of the actors in the Broadway production had autism. The director didn't have autism. The designers didn't have autism. So, again, it was a representation of autism made by people who are neurotypical. There has been an actor on the spectrum who's played the role since then, an Indiana rep. He's also now one of the founding members of the new National Disability Theater, Mickey Rowe. But in my reading of this performance, the Broadway performance, Curious calls on and reinforces popular stereotypes associated with autism in the popular imagination, such as an inability to read emotion and empathize with others. There's a conflation with robots, aliens, and machine, and savantism. They all work together to construct the character with autism and autism itself as an identity category that is something other than human. So again, like our Glee example, it becomes this dehumanizing trope. So the reason that this is important is that representation matters, right? Representation matters in the theater, and it matters in other areas as well. So for example, these sorts of tropes have a real impact on real people with disabilities. They feed into practices that stigmatize and segregate. So, voting. So we all know that the Iowa caucus had some issues. But before all of that, the New York Times reported on how inherently inaccessible the Iowa caucus process is. Caucusing involves potentially long lines in spaces that may not be accessible. You're sometimes out in the cold, there's limited seating, you might be in a really crowded area where you have to change places, like move around. That crowded area might be really loud, there might be unexpected sounds, there might be bright lights, there may be sensory input that you cannot predict. So again, inherently inaccessible. The New York Times reported that disability advocates who requested accommodations for the caucusing process were met with red tape and unanswered calls. Last month, the ACLU wrote a letter to Congress reporting that 83% of polling places do not meet ADA accessibility requirements, and asserting that people with disabilities are treated like second-class citizens in our democracy. So, representation matters in voting and in theater. One of my favorite scholars is James Thompson, and he argues that the presence involved in the theatrical process, the in-person, face-to-face aspect of theater, is a call that can encourage the audience member to see the actor's presence as a call to respect their humanity. So it was so important to us, for many of these reasons, to cast an actor with autism in the role of Caitlin in our production of Mockingbird. And the thing is that it's not difficult to make things more inclusive. We found a stellar young actor in Maddie, who, again, is on the autism spectrum and who's playing the main character of Caitlin. Family Theater is a disability inclusive theater in Denver, Colorado. And they talk about disability as a creative asset. And that's very much at play in CTM's production of Mockingbird. There are, I'll be honest, some problematic things about the script. There are some stereotypical representations of autism in the script. But CTM's production really leans away from those stereotypes. Instead, Maddie's lived experience with autism becomes a creative asset that she draws on to bring a really fully realized, well-rounded character to the stage. We made a number of accommodations for Maddie. She has a support person, and we designed the audition, rehearsal, and production processes to provide various accommodations. She has a break space, she has an adapted rehearsal schedule. We offered trainings for the cast and crew on autism and inclusive practices. She also has something that we're calling a cover. Amelie Labar is another young actor who is the cover for Caitlin. So there are, I think, 11 or 12 performances. Amelie will perform in 3 of them. When Maddie maybe finds the process to be overwhelming in some way, she can step out and Amelie steps in. There are things that we set with Amelie and then bring Maddie in to learn from Amelie so that then so the 2 actors are working together. Amelie is an experienced young actor with a good actor's toolbox. Maddie is brand new to the theater. So Amelie is really learning from Maddie's interpretation of the character. Maddie is learning from Amelie's theater skills. They're making a really great team. We also formed a new partnership with a group named Artworking, which is a nonprofit organization that provides support to artists and entrepreneurs with disabilities. We currently have a visual art exhibition up in the Playhouse Gallery at the Overture. It's called Creative Life on the Spectrum. It'll be there until March 1st. The exhibition also features work by youth from 2 organizations in town, CI Pediatric Therapies and Achieving Collaborative Treatment, that serve youth on the spectrum. As a matter of fact, our Maddie has a piece in the exhibition in what we're calling Caitlin's Corner, which is where the youth work is located. We also have utilized artwork by Seth Albertson, who is an artist with a disability. His artwork is in the set, and his artwork makes up some of the props in the show. Maddie was quoted recently in the Isthmus in a promotional article for the show. She says, "I wanted a role where I could actually show how autism works. I also would like audience members to think of autism as a similarity, not a difference." We commonly think of barriers to participation, I think, in terms of ramps or physical barriers, but it's often attitudinal barriers, I think, that we need to overcome the most. I've worked in this field for 20 years, and I've been told a lot by people who are a little newer to the field, "Oh, they can't do that." And always my response is, "Oh, yes, they can." And that attitude, that reframing, makes a huge difference. Often, again, the attitudes are in accordance with that medical model, right? Where it's something to be fixed, or thinking of disability as a deficit. If we reframe that, it's often the people with disabilities the onus is on them to seek out the accommodations. But if we reframe that, and instead of putting the onus on people with disabilities to seek out the accommodations, we think about how we can offer lots and lots of different options for accessibility in everything that we do, that turns it on its head in a productive way. At CTM, one of the things that we've done is really explicitly embed inclusion into every aspect of what we do, every aspect of our productions and programs. Because we've made it so explicit, the people that we serve with disabilities has increased by a good amount. We have inclusive classes. We also have classes that are just for students with disabilities. We offer internships. We offer inclusive productions. And one of the things that I say over and over and over again is that if there is any child in our community who wants to participate in our programs and productions and thinks they can't, come and talk to me because I will make a plan for you. So again, it's explicit, it's embedded in our mission, and it's embedded in everything that we do. Oftentimes, what we do is sort of, as a culture, when we create new endeavors, or any endeavor, we're often sort of reaching out to someone who's middle of the road, right? We think there's one sort of, in my dissertation I refer to it as the normate, right? So we think there's like one normate, but if we really expand our view and think of the entire spectrum of human diversity, again, that sort of attitudinal shift is the first step to being more inclusive. Thinking about disability as an asset and thinking about the strengths of people with disabilities rather than thinking of disability as a deficit is also a really great reframing that really turns that on its head. So I invite you, if you're thinking about employment, if you're thinking about recruiting volunteers, if you're thinking about recruiting speakers, if you're thinking about bringing someone into your organization, a particular place of need is students who are transitioning. So students who are transitioning from high school into the workforce need volunteer opportunities. They need internships. I also encourage you to support the creativity of the artists with disabilities that we have in our community. Again, thinking about the strengths of our ability diverse community with organizations like Artworking, Arts for All Wisconsin, the Encore Theater here in Madison, and of course, CTM's production of Mockingbird. Speaking of, I have a discount code for you. The discount code is Bird Family. If you're interested in seeing our show, that'll give you 40% off the tickets, and we'd love to see you there. There are talkbacks after every student matinee and after every public performance. At least half of them will be with me. So so again, we'd love to see you there. We'd love to have you see the show. And thank you so much for having me here tonight to talk about Mockingbird and disability representation.
Ro is going to take this mic and run around and take your questions, and Megwin's going to use this one.
Are there any questions? You gonna make sure the mic is working there?
Hello.
Yeah. So Megwin, before I have a question, I'm Rick Beshen. Live in the town of Oregon, and I just want to put it, before I ask a question, I want to put a plug in for anybody who's going to your production to go early and look at the artwork that's on the walls. It's worth a visit by itself. It's really amazing. So my question is, that's at the, how do I know?
How do you know it's amazing?
Well, I know it's amazing because I saw it.
It really is beautiful. We just had an article in the Isthmus, so if you're curious about it at all, some of the pieces are in the article. Again, it's beautiful work. And Laura Falkenberg at Artworking hung the exhibition, and she did an amazing job.
Yeah, if you're downtown on State Street, just dodge in and take a look.
Go in and get warm.
Go in and get warm and enjoy the art. So my question is, you know, you live in Oregon, oftentimes you don't see a disabled person or someone you know is disabled. Who do you think are the hidden disabled people in our community?
So one of the things, this is going to be sort of a roundabout answer to your question. My first job outside of college was at Community Haven for Adults and Children with Disabilities, and I worked with them on their theater program. It was a partnership program between the Oslo Repertory Theater and Community Haven. It was Children's Haven then. And you had to drive 20 minutes off the main road to get to Community Haven. And that was 20 years after it had been built. So when it was built, it was way, way far away. So when we're thinking about disability inclusion, There's still a great deal, I think, of separation, and people with disabilities are often kept in very specific places. That's decreased a great deal because I don't know, when I was coming through the school system, there were special education classrooms, and now there's much more integration. So, the short answer is that in Madison, I can't speak to Oregon, but in Madison, I know that there are community centers, there are day centers that serve adults with developmental and cognitive disabilities. There's specialized programming. Again, Arts for All Wisconsin comes to mind, where they offer art classes. There are places where that are sort of specialized, and there are specific programs that are sort of for community integration. We, as individuals, can do more community integration individually. I'm glad that you brought up hidden disabilities versus visible disabilities, because there are so many invisible disabilities, and we can strategize to make things accessible to a really wide array of people so that it doesn't matter if the disability is visible or invisible, everything is still accessible. I talk a lot about universal design for learning. Universal design for learning is based on universal design in architecture. So if you think about a ramp or a curb cutout, a curb cutout is really essential for someone who utilizes a wheelchair. It's also super handy for me if I'm pushing a stroller, right? So when I'm designing something, I'm often thinking about presenting the same information in lots and lots of different ways so that anyone with any learning style can find a route into what I'm offering. So I don't, again, often people with disabilities are kept in really specialized spaces. We can push back against that by making sure that all of our spaces, by thinking through what really diverse populations might need and embedding that in our design everywhere that we go.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question about how we can help educate health professionals on working with people with disability and the different kinds of disabilities. I know that, there's thoughts where you can do a simulation, for example, of having Alzheimer's or having disabilities related to aging. But that may not, I don't know, that might not be the best way. I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
I think it's always problematic when someone who is not in a specific identity category takes on a role of someone who is in a specific identity category. I would be deeply uncomfortable trying to participate in a simulation that simulates someone with Alzheimer's or another age-related disability. I think that a key strategy for equity, diversity, and inclusion is to always bring in the most marginalized voices into leadership roles and positions. So rather than people with disabilities trying to figure out how to best serve people without disabilities, trying to figure out how to best serve people with disabilities, the simplest answer is go ask. Go get some volunteers, go hire somebody, go bring someone in who actually can speak to that and brings that lived experience and expertise. I can speak to this more from an education perspective because it's a real problem because teachers are sort of taught to teach, are sort of taught in school to teach to this middle student, right, this average student, and that is not who is in their classroom. They get classes that are like one class that's like alphabet soup, right? That is not preparation for the diverse learners that they encounter once they go into the classroom. So again, the best way to set it up, my first question, So I led a drama workshop today for 17 kids who were K through 3. And anytime I had a problem, the very first thing I did was say, what can I do to help you right now? Because I don't know this kid, I just met this kid. But this kid, instead of me just trying a bunch of different strategies, if I just empower this kid to tell me what I can do, I'm gonna have such better luck. It's not guaranteed, but it's better. So seek out the person who has expertise is sort of always the way to go. And always design for the most diverse group possible so that it's essential for some, but helpful to everybody. Did that speak to your question?
I think so.
Other questions?
First of all, I want to thank you, Megwin. As a retired educator who had lots of students with disabilities in my classrooms over time, I can certainly empathize with all these perspectives. And I just want to comment on the last thing. Teachers now are receiving a lot more education around how to plan, backwards plan for all kinds of students. Some of the best training I had for how to think about all the students in my class was from a woman who is a specialist in autism. And she said to me, think of the 3 most important concepts you want kids to end this unit with. And then think of a profile child at each end of the cognitive and ability, disability spectrum. And what do you want your most gifted child to get from it and your most challenged child to get from it? And when you boil it down to those 3 things, and I remember specifically when we were talking about Mesopotamia and the beginning of permanent settlements, I wanted them to know farming, writing, farming, permanent settlements, writing, in that order. And I had a student in my class who was pretty severely autistic, and we had symbols for him. Farming was a tractor. Of course, that was modern. It was not Mesopotamian. And permanent settlement was a house, and writing was a pencil.
Yeah.
But those were concepts by the end of that unit, and he participated in ways that he could. He knew, he understood. This is what came from this civilization, from this beginning of civilization. Of course, the most gifted students knew all about Hammurabi's code and all those other things, but I appreciate that, we've come a long way in education from the times when things were segregated, and I just wanted to express my appreciation, that's all.
That's a very UDL thing that you just said. Like, if you hone in on the objective, the UDL way of thinking of that is you hone in on the objective, and then students can take all kinds of routes to get there, because that part doesn't matter. What matters is the objective that you set. Yeah.
Other questions?
This is more related to the schools, not health professionals. But what are your recommendations for dealing with bullying around a disability that a child may have?
I know that they're taking bullying very seriously in the schools these days. I think the way that I think about it is that, one of the ways that I think about it, is that I have a PhD. I also can't alphabetize things. Just awful at it. And so at the risk of being too simplistic, I think sort of making those connections to we all have strengths and assets, right? So again, that asset-based approach and the approach of what we have in common. I'm not an expert in bullying at all. I do feel strongly, though, about offering the safety and respect to everyone involved in this situation, and the acknowledgement that that may vary greatly from person to person. I also think that it becomes too, right now in the schools, they're embedding inclusiveness from the get-go. And I think that is the key to really pushing back against bullying. That it has been normalized for my 6-year-old that I took him last week to teach a class with me, a drama with kiddos with autism. And again, he just takes it all in stride. We talked about it beforehand, and so he knew some of the things to expect, but he's had classmates with disabilities, since he's been in school, since preschool. So again, he sort of embraced the full spectrum of human difference since he was, for his entire life, because he's my kid. But even if that wasn't the case, since he's been in school, and I think that those larger, broader efforts are key to those smaller personal interactions. We're never gonna eliminate it, I don't think. There's always gonna be a case by case. But the systems in place for inclusion from the get-go, I think are, again, really key for that.
Next question?
I'm wondering what your opinion is politically of the support for people with autism when they become adults. It seems like my background is a vocational rehabilitation counselor. There's a very nice protected environment. It certainly doesn't have enough resources while they're still in school. And that goes on until they're age 22. And then after that, they fall off a cliff,
Yeah.
okay, in many cases. What's your view of that, and what should we do about it?
I think it's a problem, and I think it's a problem related to representation. When we see people with autism, we see kids, and we see a really, again, specific and socially constructed, acceptable form of autism. Supports vary from individual to individual. I know a person with autism who's going to need a supportive environment for his entire life. He's going to need a lot of support and a lot of accommodations, and he doesn't have the capacity to live on his own. I know another person with autism who has a small business, who is frankly doing, he's doing fantastic and is amazing at self-promotion. So it varies so greatly, but it is a problem because it's what I was talking about with internships, right? That kids graduate from school and then there's nothing. I forget the statistic, forgive me, but it's been studied and proven that businesses that hire people with disabilities see a boost in their business. The general population wants to support businesses who hire people with disabilities. The business that we're sitting in right now has an employee with a cognitive disability. I assume it's cognitive because I've seen him here, but I don't know. But so this business employs a person with a disability. So I agree with you that it's a problem. I still think it's an attitudinal barrier. People with disabilities, particularly cognitive disabilities or developmental disabilities, are put into certain categories of work, right? And those categories of work are cleaning, cooking, right? Service jobs. So I have an intern right now. Her name is Madison. And Madison has a disability. She's from the Edgewood program from Edgewood College. She's at the Cutting Edge program. Do you guys know the Cutting Edge program? They are amazing. I love the Cutting Edge program. The Cutting Edge program supports students with cognitive and developmental disabilities to go to college. And so she has an internship with me. Madison has a great many strengths, and she is learning to sort of be a teacher and to assist a teacher. Today, she led an activity. She also is a master with construction paper and tape. That woman is amazing. So again, if you target those strengths, and if there's opportunity for her to find and express those strengths, then you don't have to, put her in that box of, a service position that's again restricted to things like cleaning and cooking and such as that. That's great if that's where your assets are, but if your assets are in making amazing construction paper costumes for kindergartners, then for Pete's sake, let's take advantage of that, because I badly needed that skill set today, and she had it. So the short answer is that I don't know what the answer is, but I agree with you that it's a really big problem, and that supports moving in that transition period from school to employment. There are some in place, there needs to be much, much more. And we can all take part in that. Any of us who participate in employment decisions or have internship programs where we work, we can put in a plug. There are agencies that you can contact, schools that you can contact who can hook you up with individuals with great skills with construction paper and tape, right? So, and that sort of making a more fruitful transition period, creates more opportunities down the road as well. So no, and I'm just gonna go back to representation for one more time, because it's not just that there's not as many opportunities, it's like we as a culture forget about them once they're not, cute and five anymore. Thanks for your question.
Any other questions? Let's give a round of applause to Megwin.
Thank you, Ro, for running around with questions, and thank you, Megwin. I just left them at my table. We have a couple of people who want to speak at the mic. If you have something that you want to say, the slips are in the back of the room. We have two people. The first one is Carlene Beshen. Oh, Carlene's got the slips too. But she wants to come up and talk, followed by Charles Uphoff. And then I'll do a last check to see if anybody else wants to go. Carlene's coming. She's grabbing her stuff. I was just going to mention something about what Megwin said about seeing disability as an asset. My husband has ADD. Sorry, hon, I just outed you. But he often talks about it as a gift. He read a great book by Tom Hartman, the same progressive radio guy. He has ADD, and he wrote a fantastic book about seeing ADD as being a hunter in a farmer's world. Farmers are very linear, you've got to plant crops and everything makes sense, whereas if you're a hunter, you're on the chase, and you gotta be aware of all your surroundings, because if you're out hunting an animal, you're listening and you're watching and you're aware of everything. It's a really great metaphor for having ADD, and we use his gift a lot because I'm a little bit disorganized, and I'm like, honey, I can't find my whatever it is, and he'll be like, okay, hang on. He'll find it right away because he notices when things are out of place. So, it is a gift, and you just have to look at it that way.
Thank you. So a lot of times I'm up here holding the mic as the MC, and thank you, Amanda, for doing that tonight. And so up here tonight, I am in my role as the Fair Maps organizer with Wisconsin Voices. I am the connective tissue between the grassroots organizing that's happening around the state and the nonprofit groups that are working on ending gerrymandering in our state. So I just want to say a couple of things about that. First of all, this is going to be a long, long, long campaign, so prepare yourself for that. We know that there's been legislation proposed since 2003 in every biennia, and it's never passed. When Democrats were in charge, when Republicans were in charge, it's never passed. So we're thinking that this is going to end up in the courts, but in the meantime, our goal is to create a lot of public pressure on legislators to co-sponsor the legislation and after the April 7th Supreme Court election to put pressure on candidates to support fair maps legislation. So I have two things along those lines. The first is postcards that look like this. These are postcards to send to current legislators that say, we want you to support fair maps legislation. So if you would each take two and address them, or actually put your address on them, I can address them to your legislator because it's easy enough to figure out who they are, and then based on your address. And then the next one is a pledge for you to take. This is a voter pledge that says, I'm only going to vote for candidates who have pledged support for fair maps legislation. So they look a little different. The one with the map or the outline of Wisconsin is the voter pledge. And then I also have a petition that says, this matters to me, basically. And this is so that we can just build the lists of people who are supporting. So I'm going to start this over here with Amanda. I also have a little bit of swag. I have stickers back there that I really appreciate it if folks would take. And then I just want you to know that this is, just because this is a long campaign does not mean it's not a winnable campaign. The very first and most important piece of that is getting a more balanced court. The justice who is running, who's the incumbent justice, we know where he stands on maps because he defended our current maps. He was one of the defense attorneys that went before the courts to defend our current very gerrymandered maps. So we know where he stands. So last month we had the two other candidates, Joe Karofsky and Ed Falone, who were here. That primary is February 18th. It's really important that you cast your ballot for one of them if you are at all supportive of fair maps, because we know the other guy is not. And then finally, also it's really, really, really important that everybody votes on April 7th so that we have a more balanced Supreme Court. These, whatever maps are drawn are going to eventually go to court, and after the Supreme Court's stance in June on hearing cases of state gerrymandering, partisan gerrymandering, we can expect that it will probably go to our own state Supreme Court, and so we need to be prepared for that. Legal minds who know much more than I do about how these systems work are strategizing around that even now. So please sign the petition, send postcards to your legislators. I'll give each one of you two of the purple and one of the blue, and thank you. Oh, and also Mary has information about Karofsky and Falone. Thank you.
Awesome.
And we're going to be talking about it tomorrow as we canvass, so if you want to join us for that canvass, that'd be great.
It's gonna be fun. Okay, Charlie, up off.
Thank you, Amanda. I want to extend an invitation to people who might have some time on their hands and want to participate in something interesting this summer. We are planning a 70-city road tour to register voters. We're going to be purchasing a 34-foot motorhome to use a mobile registration site equipped with Wi-Fi hotspot so we can register people anywhere in the state. In addition to talking about voter registration and getting people registered, we also are going to be working with a lot of other groups to provide information about the census, about fair maps, about whatever local issues are concerned, whether it's water quality or frac sign mining, local control. And it looks to be an exciting thing. We're going to be starting the tour March 8th. Our first tour is going to be going to Sauk City, Baraboo, and Reedsburg. The second week is going to be a weekend in Milwaukee. The third week is going to be the Wisconsin Grassroots Festival in Maizabady at Wisconsin Heights High School. And then 2 more weekends in Milwaukee, partly because there are a lot of unregistered voters in Milwaukee. I put together a spreadsheet with voter registration data for every ward in the state of Wisconsin. In Milwaukee alone, 43,709 fewer registered voters in December last year than were registered in 2016. So it's really critical. The key for all the issues we care about is going to be turnout. And voter registration is a critical part of that. If you're at all interested, if you'd be interested in getting on the bus, joining us to, we're going to have a caravan as well with people following a caravan to do covering turfs and knocking on doors, voter registration. We hope to be able to get a list from city and municipal clerks of people who've been purged from voter lists to make sure that they know that they may not be able to vote unless they re-register. So there's going to be a massive effort all over the state. We've got maps and logos and we're going to have car magnets for the cars that are going to be accompanying us on the tour. And the motorhome Sleep 6. So if you're interested in joining the tour, please get in touch. We'd be happy to have you come along on the tour.
That can be just for a weekend or something too. You're not committing to a month of things. If you have a spare weekend and you want to join the tour for just that weekend, you can do that.
Sometimes people want one weekend day.
Or one weekend day.
Yeah.
Yep, so lots of flexibility if you're interested. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to say? I don't have any more slips, so I think that means we can wrap it up. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you to the people watching at home. We appreciate, oh, Marcel, would you like?
Remind people of the Democrat debate tonight at 8 o'clock.
Oh, apparently there's a Democratic debate tonight at 8 o'clock, so,
ABC.
on ABC.
You should just let folks know if they fill these out, they can put them back here and I'll mail them.
Okay, so if you filled out one of the postcards that Carlene was talking about, put them on the back table, and she will take care of mailing them. We'll stamp them, we'll mail them for you. Okay, we'll wrap it up. Thanks for coming. We are going to have an open mic the first Friday in March. I don't know what the date is yet, but we'll have a program then too. And do we know what it is yet? The March? Maybe not. Anyway, first Friday in March, come out to the Firefly, 6 p.m. We'll see you then. Bye.